Hello everyone and welcome to the Gunpla Network. I'm the Spicer, and today's review of 2012's Master Grade Vercon Nu Gundam comes to you courtesy of those fine folks over at Canadian Gundam. Canadian Gundam is your one-stop shop for all things Playmo and Gunpla here in North America. They've got a vast catalog that they restock regularly, flat rate shipping to the US and Canada, and a private warehouse option. So when you're checking that vast catalog for all your Gunpla and Playmo needs, don't forget to use the promo code Gunpla Network to save yourself 10% off. If you watched the unboxing for this, then you knew I was a little skeptical going in. A lot of people have this really high up on their kind of greatest master grades list, maybe not one or two, but usually the top 5. And I was kind of concerned about my ability to really bring a solid build to a Verca. I know it's more complex, and it's been a bit since I built a Verca. And while it was more mechanically intensive as far as the engineering of moving parts and things, and kind of tedious with all the psycho frame, it is a very visually pleasing package once it's done, regardless whether you leave it in this framed portion or you just fully build it out with all the armor and stuff. The psycho frame is nice, I will say. The reflective stickers on the underside of all the psycho frame are tedious though. If you are like me and your hands are a little shaky and you're not great at sticker fitting, these are going to be kind of a pain. If you're patient, it's not too bad, but you do have to have that patience. If it's something that will frustrate you very easily. I had to stop a couple of times in this build. Because, like I said, my hands are a little shaky. But outside of that, the actual build itself wasn't too challenging. There were a couple parts here and there, but generally speaking, it was more adding the armor on that was the challenge versus the actual frame. As far as the top of the frame goes, the psycho frame shows through pretty nice. I did miss the psycho frame on the top of the chest there, but the bottom of the torso and the bicep and the forearm, all there, they do get covered up, and I will say the mechanism on the lower torso doesn't pull out quite as nicely as the arms do. And then once you get to the legs, I did forget to put the feet and thigh psycho frame on here, but you do get the knee and the front of the leg versions here, and they look fine. They go in pretty well, and as far as like mechanisms and gimmicks, everything's pretty stable. Now, once you get the armor on, you actually have a couple of different options, and a few aren't listed here, but these are the two main ones. So you kind of get your more traditional Nu on the left, where it's got all the armor, none of it's separated, none of the psycho frame is showing through, and then you get the kind of quote-unquote transformed version on the right with all the psycho frame. And personally, I'm going to leave mine in the psycho frame configuration, but it is up to you. It's not a drastically different look, but I think it does add a little bit more flair to it, if you will. You do get a couple of different option parts as well. You do get the option for the double fin funnel attachment instead of having the beam saber there on the shoulder or the backpack. And you get a couple of other parts which really just change like the lower vent portion from that deep navy to a white. And I think a couple of different things on the legs, but generally speaking, they're all going to roughly look the same with just minor tweaks. And this is what they look side by side. I think, like I said, the psycho frame helps it pop a little bit, but it's not, overly done. It's not super dramatic. I will say, though, this kind of transformation gimmick does make several different parts quite loose. Some to the benefit of the kit, but generally speaking, most of them are kind of a negative downside. We'll talk about more when I look at the posing, but generally speaking, this is what you're looking at. In terms of the kind of the torso, the upper side of things, you get it in the top of the chest. Like I said, that waist mechanism doesn't really work super well, or I'm just not understanding how it's supposed to pull out. But I've tried quite a few things, taken some of it apart, and it just does not work for me for whatever reason. But then you get the shoulders, the biceps, and the forearms, and they all look pretty good. I will say the forearm extension bit, the little transformation piece there, is quite hard to get out if you don't have either a part separator or fingernails or something. It's in there quite tightly, so it doesn't like to move super easily. But outside of that, the only other notable thing on the chest is the chest transformation bit's little slidey gimmick there on top of the vents is really loose for me. So it doesn't really affect it really in most ways. It's just they come out really easy. They don't fall off, they just slide down. So if you do want the more traditional Nu look, kind of keep that in mind when you're moving it around. And then you get down to the lower side of things, and this is probably the most substantial in terms of like actually removing parts and changing it. You remove a part up on the bottom of the thigh and the bottom of the back of the calf. You do have a pull down mechanism on both of them, which is actually kind of interesting. It does add a little bit of height to the Nu Gundam, not like a huge amount, but it is there. And you do get a little bit there on the feet, which is pretty surprising. I didn't expect that, and I didn't even think to look there. But you do have that. These, I think, do pop the most. But with the calf version, or the calf psycho frame kind of being in there with that navy blue, if the light doesn't catch that sticker, it kind of just blends in. So it is what it is. Like I said, I prefer the psycho frame version, but now you have a reference point for both of them. So once we actually get to putting things on it and kind of seeing how it poses around, how it kind of play with it and mess with it, we really start to see some of the really cool stuff, but also some of the big negatives to this kit. Keeping in mind that it's a 2012 kit that kind of pushed mechanisms for its era, in that context, it's really impressive. But by comparison to a lot of newer stuff, you see the idea, but you don't see like the execution we get today. So the best contrast that you can really see for this is if we don't have the fin funnels on, generally speaking, everything's fine. The bazooka attachment's a little finicky. The bazooka barrel likes to slide down, but generally speaking, the shield works fine, the beam rifle works fine, and getting this to stand is not all that difficult. As far as its weighting and kind of where the center of gravity is, it's not really too bad, even on a slick surface like this. Getting it to stand in a fairly static pose is reasonably easy. However, once you add those absolutely iconic but poorly executed fin funnels to the back, you start to see you have to adjust the legs quite a bit, lean it forward, and the fin funnels kind of have to rest on the shield. Now, from what I understand, the real grade Nu doesn't have this same attachment mechanism, and it's a little bit better. But the attachments for the fin funnels to each other is inventive, but not very well executed. And you get that here. The most iconic part, the asymmetric look of it, is the downfall of this kit. Like, the base kit itself is fine, it's great, but those fin funnels do not like to stay attached to each other, but love to stay attached to the backpack. And what I mean is the one that attaches to the backpack is fine. Every other subsequent one attached to it does not like to stay most of the time, and if you don't pay attention when you're building them, you will build at least one side of a funnel backwards and almost break it to fix it. It's a whole thing. But even if you don't do that stress, like I stressed a couple of them, pretty much all 6 of them at this point have the same issue, and it's mildly infuriating when you're trying to pose it. Now, luckily, if you don't want to use the funnels, which would be a little strange, but more power to you because I'm very heavily considering it right now, this shield and the beam rifle work fine, and you can get some great ground poses. You can bring the shield forward, have it kind of at a defensive posture, have the beam rifle back. The wrist does get a little weak, as I've messed with it a fair bit, but it is still a little surprising that it is this weak. You do have to work with it, but you can get it in a fairly stable pose. But you can pull off ground poses with this. The feet work, they're very big, the legs are pretty solid themselves, so as long as you don't have something pulling on the back, it's not a huge problem. But if you want to use the bazooka, you can, and it mostly works fine. It looks okay, I guess. Not my preferred weapon, and it's not one I ever see me really posing this with outside of this review, but it's there, and if you want to use it, it is functional, I suppose. Then once you get to the beam sabers, you start to realize that the hand technology that we have in today's master grades is so much better. The pre-posed hands are the absolute best. These individual fingers, while cool in concept, are kind of awful in practice. They like to pop out at the ball joint at the knuckle, and while they do collapse around, they don't get fully around like you see here on the Beam Saber. So you can have a fairly convincing holding pose, but it is something that if you really pay attention to those things, it's probably going to drive you nuts like it has me. Barring if you don't lose any fingers, by the way, because I've almost lost a couple of them at certain points. But here we have the big beam saber that goes on the backpack. It's got the little beam that comes out the back, and it's got the big, cool, curved beam that comes out the top. And then we can do a double beam saber pose, because you do get two beam sabers. The one from the backpack and the one on the forearm on the left side of the mobile suit. Both work fine, both attach in. Neither hand really covers the hilt, but it's fine. Bring the thumb around and it looks like it's holding it anyway. And you have a cool two beam saber pose that you can do on a stand. And that is kind of the saving grace of the downside of those funnels, is it comes with a stand to pose them. If it did not, this would not even be a conversation. This would not be a top 10 kit by any means. Like I said, the base is fine, but arguably the coolest, most iconic part of it is executed incredibly poorly. And I'd even say for 2012 is kinda sketch. But anyway, once we get to those funnels on that stand, they look pretty good. They're fine. The attachments are a little weird, but once you get to moving around and kind of understanding how they move, you can get them pretty much anywhere you need. This is one part I will say that if you have some problems building the funnels and build one side kind of accidentally backwards, it will loosen that plastic, and you'll notice that some of these are either collapsing towards each other or way too open because they'll collapse towards each other otherwise. But generally speaking, the display capabilities that this stand gives you is pretty nice. But it is all centered around the funnels because they kind of knew, hey, we have to fix the funnel problem because it's one of the big draws of the Nu Gundam. It doesn't allow you to really angle the mobile suit. It's very much like the Freedom 2.0 stand. It's kind of just static in one spot for the most part. But you do get a lot of posability, if you will, out of the funnels just due to like the three different joints you get on each clear piece. You have a ball joint on the end where it connects to the actual funnel. And then you have two pegs that kind of can rotate, not quite 365, but you get the idea. They can rotate on the actual peg, so you can go up, down, left, right, wherever you need to. And it looks fine. Generally speaking, I myself will not be posing the fin funnels on the backpack. If I have them posed at all, they're going to be posed on this stand, because I don't like them on the backpack at all. Anyway, if you can kind of get a different shot here, so if it's up higher up on your shelf, it is a little bit more imposing. It has quite a bit of shelf presence. And keep in mind, this is right out of box, so this is kind of minor panel lining and no stickers. No water slides, no nothing outside of the stickers on the underside of the Psycho Frame. And it's very impressive. It is visually out of box one of the more impressive kits I can think of. Now, it's no real grade Sananju by any means, but it is very nice in terms of its presentation and the options it gives you. Now, if you decide you want to go for a more subtle pose or something, you can do that. The cockpit opens, you can get it in a kneeling pose. One of the cool things about those fully articulated fingers is if you want to hold something a little bit larger, you can absolutely pull off a convincing pose like that. And even with those big legs, you do have to pop up that front skirt, but you can get it in a kneeling pose, which I was very surprised. I didn't think I'd actually be able to do this. And that kind of brings me to my conclusion on this kit. The kit itself, the main body, is actually kind of surprising. It is very versatile. It can stand, it can do a lot of ground poses, it can kneel, it has a lot of really interesting mechanics and design work, but all of that is dragged down by those funnels. The funnels are the single absolute worst part of this kit and are borderline to the point, borderline ruinous for this kit in my opinion. If it didn't come with a stand, this would be a hard pass for most people for me, but since it has that stand, if you're a fan of the Nu Gundam, I'd say this is definitely one to pick up. If you don't already have it, I assume you probably do, but I wouldn't say it's the pinnacle of Nu Gundam technology, if you will. And that's kind of my conclusion. It's good. It was good for its era. It's still mostly pretty good for now. But if you want the kind of end-all, be-all Nu Gundam, it's probably the real grade. There's a lot of cool stuff here. It's kind of well worth the build. But if you're someone that doesn't like finicky pieces, or you like to pose things around a lot, this is probably something I would say is a hard pass. The kit itself is fine for posing, and once you get it on the stand with the funnels, it works fine. But if you want that iconic asymmetrical funnel look, this is an absolute nightmare. I'm very, very glad that I'm done with it. I'm going to put it in one pose, put it on my shelf, and probably not touch it outside of trying to dust it, because this thing is all kinds of a headache with the fin funnels. Everything else is fine, but those fin funnels are the absolute bane of my existence and have been for about the last week. Now, that's enough of me complaining about those accursed fin funnels. Let me know in the comments down below, am I just too bothered by these fin funnels, or have you guys had the same experience? Do you think the kit is the pinnacle of Nu Gundam technology, or is that the real grade, or God forbid the high grade? I'm sure the high grade is probably older than this is. But let me know. Let me know in the comments down below. I'd like to see what you guys are thinking and your experience with this build, and if maybe I'm just being a little too cynical. But anyway, those are my thoughts. Thanks for sticking with me for the 20-ish minutes this video ran. I do greatly appreciate it. And as always, friends, do your best to stay safe and keep on building.